Every book on business growth discusses the importance of company culture. Unfortunately, they don't tend to talk about company culture as something that needs to be capable of changing or even being resilient. They speak in binary terms. If you get it right, things go well. If you get it wrong, then everything collapses. If this is something you fear, then we've got just the expert for this kind of moment. Dr. Terry Jackson is a celebrated member of the Goldsmith 100 coaches, a Thinkers 50 top 50 global transformation leadership coach, a top 10 global mentor. So prepare yourself for a unique discussion of company culture and the impact of how it can help or improve your success. Dr. Jackson, welcome to the Subscription Maker Impact.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
What is a culture of transition?
That's a great question because most people really don't know what it is. And a culture of transition refers to an organization that its environment is characterized by its openness to change, its openness to be adaptable and resilient in the face of those transitions. And so we have people who have the mindset and the skills plus the support systems to continue to navigate volatility, uncertainty, um, chaos, as well as any ambiguity that may present itself.
Do you believe that culture is like the big kid on the playground, the one who eats strategies lunch every day of the week?
That's a great question because um, you often hear, people recite that from Peter Drucker, that strategy actually eats culture. And I agree with you 100%. Because it's the people who make up the culture. And the culture is always in transition, meaning that there are always people going and coming, being hired, and people who are leaving. So I like to take a look at the organization and the culture as an amoeba from the biology, right? The amoeba it's living, it's continuing to shift and change, and it does have a formation to it, and that formation within the organization are those core values that drive the organization. So that's what helps cultures in transition is the core values, even though you have people going and coming all of the time.
So, what challenges do business people face when they try to create a culture of transition?
Oh man, the challenges that are faced. One, you have to understand that you have different people with different personalities coming under one roof with one mission. And that mission is to achieve the mission of that organization. So, how do you mold those people into the same mindset to go after that one particular mission, given that there's a strategy but multiple tactics within different departments of the organization? And again, I go back to core values. What's really driving the existence of the organization? And for people to buy into those core values, giving the compelling messages that are being driven by and being articulated by leadership within the organization.
So, what kind of time frame are we looking at? How long does it take us before we can expect to see some results?
That's a great question because, culture change, culture transformation, culture development, it takes time. And oftentimes you want to probably guesstimate 3 to 5 years in order to really set a solid cultural transition, transformation, culture change. But it's continuous after that foundation has been set, and that continuous uh, movement toward uh, greatness, if you will, that's dictated by what's going on, all the dynamics within the environment, internally and externally. As the market shifts, Organizations need to shift, but what they need to hold on to are the core values. For instance, I went through some cultural shifts with an organization I was doing some consulting with, and I can tell you that when I walked in the door, I can tell them, hey, this is a 3 to 5 year transition that you guys are looking into. And at that time, it'll never be complete because you'll continue to evolve as an organization.
Dr. Jackson, there are some who believe that they will not recover from even the slightest mistake or near miss. So would you talk a little bit about fear and how you help your clients overcome it?
Well, I think just the opposite. I believe in I believe in failing. I believe in making a mistake, but I also believe in understanding the lessons learned to continue to move forward. When I did some work out in Silicon Valley several years ago, one of the questions I had going from the East Coast to go to visit leaders in Silicon Valley was this: what is so different about Silicon Valley than the East Coast? And when I got out there, and I was in the Google headquarters, I was out in Intel, I was in some other organizations, and what I found is they had a word called FLEARN, FLEARN. That means fail and learn. Fail fast, learn fast, document those failures, but continue to move forward. So fear in and of itself shouldn't exist, but it does. And so what we have to overcome fear is courage. We have to move regardless of fear being in our path or not. Because what we find as we continue to move forward through fear, what we thought was fearful wasn't. It was a situation we just didn't understand. And oftentimes you don't understand, but you have to keep moving. So action in and of itself is the antidote to fear.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I want to dig a little deeper. Do you have any tips or strategies for dealing with that very special fear? That fear of making the small changes that get the ball rolling.
Hmm. As I'd mentioned, earlier, action. So let's develop a set of steps. Say you want to run in a marathon, but you've never run in a marathon before. So there has to be a game plan, and that game plan is going to include not only walking and running, but also the utilization of weights. So it's always best to have a game plan. So the first thing you have to do is you put pencil to paper and you write out an action plan. But most importantly, with that action plan, you have to do it. We heard Nike say, just do it. And I have found no better way of success than just doing it. I ran a $1 billion division of a sales and marketing company. And when I went into that position, I'd never been in that position before. But what I did know is I didn't want to fail. Actually, I wanted to be one of the best. And in 2012, my division was the best. But I did that with a slight bit of fear. But by getting to know my people, understanding them, what motivated them, what inspired them, that enabled me to put in an action plan where out of the 5 years that I was there, I was ranked between 1 and 5 in that organization. And again, on year 2012, we had the best division in the company. So action, one way or the other, is the antidote to fear. When you move, you have to reassess where you are when you land. And when you make that reassessment, it enables you to move again. So, fear in and of itself um, is a myth, because oftentimes what we fear, we find out in the end that it never really existed. It was our mind playing tricks on us. I can tell you another story of going down to the Bahamas and hopping on a boat and going out to see this coral reef, and I hadn't jumped in the ocean and swam in years. But either I was going to let the fear control me, or I was going to go achieve my goal. And I achieved my goal regardless. So it took action. It takes action. That's always the antidote.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to come at it a little differently. Now, us mere mortals, those of us who haven't achieved the heights that you've achieved, we get pushback. So what I'm asking is, how do you deal with that? When somebody you're coaching, when someone who's on your team, because you run a company now, you're CEO of something now, which we'll get to a little later. But there's always pushback. I mean, for most of us, we got to deal with it. So how do you handle that when you know you're right and you know you're helping, but that person's fearful? They got it in their head they can't do it.
They're little steps. For instance, there may be someone who may be fearful of speaking in public. Might be an executive who's got there through performance because they perform very well, but now they have to be in the public. So what we do is we talk about what's going on in the mind when you're speaking before someone. I give them little tips around when you're speaking. Don't look at the individual, look back at the wall. And understand that when you're speaking, most of the time, if you've drafted your notes, no one knows what you're saying or if you missed the sentence or not. So if it's public speaking, let's get before the mirror in the morning. Let's practice speaking. If you're sitting at the dinner table with family, speak more. Inform them what you're doing first and foremost. Inform them that you are trying to improve so that they can hold you accountable for that proof as well. And you can use them as an example. Those little wins like that add up to bigger wins. And so when you begin to practice with family and friends, once you've informed them what you're doing, you'll be surprised how accountable they'll hold you and want to buy into you're trying to improve in a particular area. So there's pushback, but more people will understand by getting them to buy into what your goal is. They'll hold you accountable, and you'll see tremendous change and tremendous improvement.
Okay, now you're talking. So I want to continue a little bit with what you were saying about public speaking. Now I saw your TEDx talk, and I was just wondering because I've talked to a lot of people on this podcast and others about TEDx, and I just wonder what was your experience like? How did you get involved, and what
That's
was the
a
impact?
great question. That was a great question. Um, there were some people who were putting together a TEDx talk in my hometown who knew me and thought that I would be interested in speaking because I was around town talking about different topics around coaching and business. And so they offered me the opportunity. Now, there was an audition, and I had to write a short, I guess, speech, if you will, and then I had to present that to be accepted. Once I was accepted, they put me in contact with a communications professor at the local university. And in so doing, he had me to write out or go through what my thoughts were around what my topic would be. Once I decided on that, I wrote out X amount of words. Given the research says that if you're going to speak for 15 minutes, there's X amount of words that's normally said within those 15 minutes. So I had to write that out. And then there was a process of practicing not only with my communications coach, but with others who participated in the TED Talk. It was a remarkable experience because one, it gave me the opportunity to speak here before a crowd of probably 600 or 700 people, and of course, it was going to be, put up on YouTube for the world to see, and hopefully, it was a topic that people could resonate with. And so, with that, it afforded me other speaking opportunities. So people can now refer to me as a TED Talk kind of speaker. It also, somewhat enhanced the consulting that I was doing. So it married the ability for me to consult and show the experience because all of my degrees and all of my experiences in business, along with someone they can see, they could hear, they could resonate with, and part of my whole platform is around transformation. Going from the caterpillar to the butterfly and what that process is like, and it's a continuous process that never ends.
Okay, now it's time to tell us a little bit about JCG Consulting Group.
Mm, Thank you so much. JCG Consulting Group is a small boutique um, company, and what we do is we do leadership development. We do executive coaching. We're involved in mergers and acquisition, integration, and we do and what we call our systems approach to organizational development. Systems, people, and process. And so we think that once we get into an organization to identify what some of the challenges may be, those challenges have impacts on every other department within that organization. And so that's why we call it a systems approach to organizational development. But we do it person by person because it is people who drive organizational performance. So normally there are tweaks at either the leadership level, the management level, or lower levels within the organization that have to happen around thought and around process. That's what we are experts at.
Okay, so how does one go from bail bondsman to COO at a sophisticated boutique consultancy?
That's a great question. And I answer that all the time by saying I was never a bail bondsman. I was a business person in the bail bonding business. And I went into that business because at the time I understood that the return on investment was 15%. And I asked myself, how many people get 15% return on a day-to-day basis? And I concluded not many. So I went into that utilizing all of my skill set from corporate America in marketing and promotions and in sales to do the same thing in the bonding business because it's a business of trust. Even though you're dealing with situations where they might be unlawful, there's still a relationship of trust where people trust you to understand what they've done and to get them out of jail. And there's a trust there for them to go back and to fulfill their obligation with the court system. So it's a great deal of trust there. You'd be surprised the type of trust that exists. And what you would also be surprised is how you get a clean understanding of human nature. And so coming from corporate America, starting that business, understanding those people that I dealt with in that business allowed me to go back into corporate America having a greater understanding of human nature. And that's what enabled me to be as successful as I was as the leader or director of the firm that I told you about, that $1 billion division in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay, so would you describe your role as a chief operating officer?
My responsibility as a chief operating officer is to make sure that we are operating in a manner in which our clients see at least a 5x improvement in organization in their people. It is for me to understand the challenges of the client to ensure that we are utilizing the proper tools, the proper people, and the proper methodology in order to drive results for our client. So it's for me to continuously assess how we perform as it relates to delivering outcomes for our client.
That works. So, Dr. Jackson, would you describe what impact means to you?
Mm. That's an interesting question because we always talk about intent to impact. And that impact is being able to see the result at the end of your work. You see the shift in mindset. You see the shift in the body language of your client. You see the improved profitability. You see the increased revenue, you see the reduction in the cost, and you see a more effective and efficient either organization or individual as a result of them coming in contact with you as an individual and in contact with JCG as an organization. Because our number one challenge is understanding and delivering upon the challenge that our client has. If that client needs to be a better communicator, if they need to understand how to manage change better, if they need to be a better listener, uh, if profitability is not where they want, maybe it's the product or maybe it's the service that's offering that's not driving the desired results that they need. Our goal is to dig in, just as a doctor would, do a diagnosis, and then give a prescription to solve that, and most importantly, operationalize that prescription such that the client is more than elated with the results that we drove. And so that's impact to me when I can see it either physically in the body, physically on the P&L, and I can see the business more vibrant than anything else.
I used to have a supervisor that used to say, you know, it's great what you're telling me. It's great all the doctor, but what's changed?
Exactly.
I think that's where you're going. What's changed? At the end of the day, if you come in and you do a job, then when you leave, something's got to change.
That's right.
And you got to be able to see that.
That's right.
Now, we often talk about, or we hear people talk about how the employee, the person who has who's most in contact with the client is important. So my question then becomes, how do you coach impact both with your team and with your clients?
Mm. That's a great question. The first thing I do is I try to get the team to understand and to put themselves in the shoes of the client. So we start with empathy. Put yourself in the shoes of the client. If you were the client, how would you want to be treated? What would you need to have done? Or what would you do? And so let's work from the client's perspective. Let's not work from a cookie cutter perspective. So let's sit and let's have a conversation with the client, with the employees. Let's get an understanding of what their perspectives and perceptions are around the particular topic. Because what you're seeking is understanding. And I think Stephen Covey said it best. It says, seek understanding, then seek to be understood. And so you want to have a conversation to understand where they are, and most importantly, where they want to go. So you can understand what that gap is, because it's really a gap analysis. Who do you want to be? Where are you? And how do we close the gap in between? And that happens from conversation. And so you never engage with a client without having the conversation of understanding up front, because what you're really trying to do is understanding how they see the world, the paradigm they live in. We call it mental models. What is your mental model around this particular topic? Help me understand it. Let's dissect it, and let's help you create another one. So we're looking at we're looking at behaviors, habits of behaviors, because everything in our life is driven by a habit. How can we help you dissect that and create new habits at the same time? So it's all around action. It's around doing. That's how things happen. Things happen when people do things, not sit all the time and talk around. I talk about what they want to do, but the actual doing itself.
Okay. Now it sounds like you're a lot like me. I'm a systems guy. You know, I believe I see the world through systems. You know, I want to put together a system so that that there's some kind of repeatability.
Yes.
But what tends to happen is when you say you're a systems guy, you got to also talk about optimization. And you got to talk about that point when you get close to optimizing the impact of a system. Basically, systems perform as they are designed to perform. And when you ask them to perform outside of those tolerances, they break, they degrade. So, my question becomes, how do you coach? How do you help your team optimize the impact and then know when they're close to the point at which they need to move on to a different system? When they've made as much impact with this system as possible, and now we got to start to put in place a team, we got to start to look at what we need to do next. How does that happen?
That's a great question. That is a great question because that speaks to disruption, right? And oftentimes it's better to disrupt yourself than to be disrupted by something else.
Every
And
day.
yeah, absolutely. And so what I always ask is, for me, the most important question is what if? What if allows you to draw to create those scenarios to move forward to either the evolution of the system that you're currently in or the creation of a new system. And so I'll use the analogy of fire, right? I wrote an article not long ago and I talked about fire, how fire can be destructive, but fire is also, it feeds nutrients to the soil. Farmers use fire that way to be creative, right? So what I say is we're always observing what it means to optimize the system. And we're always observing, are we at the point where the system is optimized and we need to look at creating a new system? That's a natural part of the process. Because creation happens all of the time. We just have to pay attention to it, right? So we look at the boundaries of the current system. Can we push any further? If not, what new system can we create in order to go to what I'm going to call next level of operating? Let's take a look at some old systems that we know of and we're all very familiar with. Let's take a look at the taxi system, right? And how it played a part in the United States for years, and then Uber comes along. Let's take a look at Amazon selling books, and let's take a look at what Amazon is doing now. So there were some mental models that had to be destroyed. There were some what if questions that were answered. And it's not a matter of whether you think it's doable, it's a matter of having the idea out there. Because, you know, at one time we never thought that, that someone could break the 4-minute mile. But when you keep putting those examples out there, or you keep thinking about it, it's amazing what people can do. So that's why we ask people to design the wildest of systems. And then let's work into it, because what happens is light bulbs begin to go off. And as those light bulbs go off, it allows you to move from older systems to newer systems. And I'm not sure about you, but I remember the advent of the mobile phone. I was the first person at Mobile Oil in the Los Angeles district to have a mobile phone. I remember what it looked like. Now let's take a look at what it looks like today. Let's take a look at the system. So there's always someone in the background asking the question, what if? So I asked that, our people ask what if all the time. And we bring those what if scenarios to the table and we discuss them, and then we choose from the best what if scenario.
Okay, at this point, what I want to do is I want to pick up on your fire theme and tell you that on this podcast we talk about fire givers. We talk about podcasters as the fire givers of this generation, like the college radio stations were the fire givers of the last generation and the one before. So my question then becomes, given this setup, what are you most passionate about? and what kind of legacy do you want to leave? I mean, what kind of
Mm,
fire? What kind of fire do you want to pass on to the next generation?
mm. That's a great question because I talk about legacy all the time, right? And it is in purpose to legacy is what I like to talk about, right? And understanding my purpose is helping others improve their quality of life. That's 7 words. That's very intentional. So that means anyone who comes in contact with me. And so if you want to say that I'm a fire giver, that I am, I want to give the fire of possibility, right? Because in my time on this earth, looking around, I've seen a lot of people do a lot of things. I've seen a lot of inventions. I've seen a lot of what if scenarios solved. But I've also seen a lot of people who, for whatever reason, don't have hope. And I want to provide hope to some of the hopeless. I want to provide opportunity to some of those who don't think that opportunity exists. And I want to provide to show people a different way of thinking because it all begins with thought, you have decisions, you have actions, and you have results. And in order to change the result, you have to be able to change your thought, which changes every other part of that equation. And so as a fire giver, I want to develop those people who are thought leaders and most importantly, nonconformist, right? Because it's the nonconformists that we know of that help create this country as we know it. It's the nonconformists who are the entrepreneurs who are creating all of the technology as we know it. It's the conformists who end up going to work for the nonconformists. And so I want to show groups of people how to be nonconformists, how to create your own, how to take care of your own, how to produce for your own, because that's what really business is all about. Business is about being able to source a raw material, and I'm going to continue. I'm going to say thought is a part of that as well. You take it, you shape it, you mold it, you run it through a production system, and that might be the brain if it's a thought. That might be other friends who have other thoughts and share different perspectives. But then you finalize a product that you or a service that you can promote, produce, and sell to be able to create your own to become an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur in such a way that you build a business that enable others to come to work for you so they can take care of themselves and their families. I'm a fire giver, and that's what I like to be able to give.
Okay, now you're talking my language. So do you have any advice to the youth and the young entrepreneurs? Is there anything you would give them differently?
I would let me say this. I'm gonna start this way. If I had it to do again, I'd be an entrepreneur coming directly out of the school of business instead of pursuing a master's and a PhD. I understand the importance of being able to have an impact in your local economy. When I say local economy, your community economy, and being able to produce businesses that are scalable, to provide jobs, increase the tax base in your local communities. And so what I would tell them is begin the study and the reading of entrepreneurship ASAP. It's a way of life. Entrepreneurship is a way of life. And so you have to study those who have been successful at doing it. So the difference between the difference 5 years from now, the difference between the new entrepreneur and those who wanted to be an entrepreneur who didn't become it will be the people they meet, the books they read, the people they study. And so the library is available. The internet is available. You can go into some shop and talk to the local entrepreneur. All of that's available. You can listen to the podcast because there are many entrepreneurs coming on the podcast, but you have to study it. You have to live it. And that in and of itself is an education. It's great to get the piece of paper from a university that said that I was disciplined enough to follow a curriculum of study to earn this degree. But to take that piece of paper and that degree and to operationalize it as a day-to-day entrepreneur is culture shock, because you're teaching theory in school versus what it really means to do business in your community, in your city, in your state, in your country, or internationally. And we have to think globally. So we want to develop something that we can do internationally, globally. And so I would say study, read, gain the skills that are needed. That means if you're interested in being a graphic artist, study it. If you're interested in being a heating and air guy, study it. If you're interested in plumbing, study it. If you're interested in construction, study it. I just read a story not long ago. There was a guy in Detroit, Michigan. For 30 years, he was an auto mechanic. 31st year, he decided to go to medical school. Now he's a doctor. He's a physician. He's a surgeon, because he understood from an auto mechanic perspective how to repair a car. Now he could translate that into the body, because everything about a car was mimicked from the system we know as this body.
So as we start to wrap up, Dr. Jackson, is there anything you wish more people would ask you?
Is there anything that I wish more people would ask me? I think they would. I think more people should ask me about what brought me here, my life's experiences around what brought me here, my dreams, about what I've seen, it not only in the world but in the business world, and how I connect the dots. Because as you mentioned, you're a systems guy. Systems is about connecting the dots, seeing the interconnectedness of everything. So how did my drive bring me here? I'm a seasoned male in this world, and I grew up in the South. And so I remember watching television as a little boy, sitting on my grandmother's knee the night that Dr. King died, was assassinated. And I remember her words. She said, they let this happen. And so moving from a segregated system to a desegregated system, and now paying attention to what's happening with DEI, which is
And how that's villainized.
Yes, exactly. And I took my first DEI course in 1991 as an employee of Mobil Oil. And I've seen how it's evolved, how it's been, as you said, it's been villainized. And all I'm asking is, how do human beings get along? Because that's all this is. There are perceptions that because of the pigment of my skin, I gotta be real different. And I don't want to deal with whatever those differences are. But more importantly, at that very high level, I'm one human being trying to work with another human being. Why shouldn't I have the same opportunity? Because my biological function, this pigmentation, this provides a biological function. When we cut, as a surgeon friend of mine told me, he said, Terry, when I have them on the table and I cut them open, I don't care what color they are, what race they are, what ethnicity, they all look the same to me.
I think you also bring up a great point in that you had your first DEI course at a global organization. I have an international business degree, and I worked within the import-export community within within our government. And I got to know those people, and I got to know the people who supported them. And one of the things that came up was that we had an opportunity after World War II to basically run the tables. I mean, we had the only factories that worked.
Mhm.
But our leaders, our business leaders said that's too hard. I gotta change this. I gotta have the documentation translated. That's too hard. And then the Japanese came and ate our lunch, and then the Chinese came and ate our lunch. And at some point, you got to say, this is just business. DEI is business. You know, I remember going to a meeting, and it was a meeting on. It was like these guys were going to. They were putting together a tour to go to the Middle East, and they were saying, well, you go to the women around the room were being told, if you go to the Middle East, you got all these issues, and someone stood up and said, no, all they care about is that you are from America and you want to do business. That's DEI in my book.
It's amazing because when I first took DEI back in 91, it was about business, as you've said. It was about how do we drive business results by understanding others who are different from us. And the only difference, for the most part, is the outer layer, right? It's the outer layer of the skin. That's really, that's what they see as the glaring difference. So I come from a different environment. I think a little bit differently. I've had different business experiences. That's valuable because now we're talking about perspective. Once we have a conversation, we put our perspectives together, we develop a solution that's better than any one solution that could have been developed, but we use 10 different perspectives to develop that. That's what diversity is. It's about different thoughts, different perspectives coming together, finding one best way of doing business. That's a combination of all of that, right? But we're looking, at least in our country, because this has been at the root of our existence
Hey,
since the Constitution, and that is the pigment of someone's skin. That's not what it's about. It's about business results using people with different experiences and different thoughts who can drive and optimize results. That's it.
now, to shift gears a little bit, is there anything new on the horizon that you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Mm, that's a great question. Um, I think what we have to pay attention to, and a lot of people are kind of sounding somewhat of an alarm, and that is, artificial intelligence and its prediction of being able to eliminate jobs over a period of time. I was in Silicon Valley several years ago, and they were already talking about a universal income that everybody was going to be paid because jobs were going to be eliminated, right? For the most part. What I say is we have to get in front of artificial intelligence because human intelligence, in my opinion, is the zenith or the epitome of all intelligence. And so to get in front of artificial intelligence and robotics and everything that comes along with it, we have to get more acclimated to the sciences, specifically mathematics, because mathematics drives pretty much the majority of the sciences. We have to understand, the engineerings, the chemistries. We have to get caught up in what we call the STEAM that they're talking about, right? And to be production and to be become producers versus consumers. We are being pushed to be consumers versus producers. And since the advent of what we call the industrial age in corporate America, jobs have been decreased every year. Regardless of what the numbers show around the increase of jobs, the number of people working every year has been decreasing. And what that does to us is this. it puts us specifically uh, in a very in a not so good situation, because we know when unemployment increases, who's impacted the most: the unskilled, and then their ethnicities and races of people that are impacted. We have to get to the point where we are entrepreneurs. We have to get back to the point. I think we're going through another reconstruction here historically, and we have to get to the point where we are producers, and we can uh, dictate our own destinies. And I see us being put in a position where we can't dictate our destiny.
Yeah, I'm not as pessimistic. I guess what I see when I see AI is I see capability.
Mm,
And I think what happens is that where large corporations used to have the run of the mill, they used to be able to dictate everything because they hired the most people, but they also binged on them. So you would
mhm,
go through this cycle where there was a binge and they would binge and hire everybody. And then
mm,
at the slightest downturn, they would bust, and then lay everybody off. So what I'm seeing is I'm seeing this capability. I do AI automation, and it's about taking the stuff that used to take forever and finding ways to reduce that so that you have more
mhm,
time to do other things.
mhm,
And that's I don't see it. I don't see people making as much money. So that becomes. But then if you look at, like you were saying, if you look at just another take on it, not only are there fewer people working, there's also less content in the products that are produced.
mhm.
So by that observation, the prices should come down. If you look at the amount of profit corporations make, it's it outstrips the actual cost of the goods being sold. So because they found ways, engineers find ways to take
Mhm.
content out of a product. If you open your PC today, your laptop, mind you, and you look at a laptop, or even more important, if you look at a desktop from 20
Mhm.
years ago, and you look at how dense that stuff was and how much stuff was crammed into, and you look at a desktop today, you got room. There's nothing in there. And that's how it is. So people are fooled into thinking, oh, we've got inflation. No, you got profiteering. There's a difference. People are taking money out of the system. It ain't because things are costing more. They're not. They're costing less. Labor was always your biggest. That's always your biggest cost. And if you got less labor, you got a lower cost. The issue is you tell me all day, okay, the press comes out and they tell me, yeah, things are going up today. Oh my God, I'm going, how are they going up when I'm getting less for it? I mean, literally, if you look at a roll of toilet paper today versus a roll of toilet paper before the pandemic, you will find a smaller roll of toilet paper for the same price. If you go to Dunkin' Donuts today and you look at a donut from today versus one 2-3 months ago, and you will find a smaller donut.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will.
So that's
Look at a bag of potato chips. You have more air than chips for the
you're right.
most part. So
Absolutely.
you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you said that. There's profiteering that's happening, right? It's like having sold gasoline. And at the time that I sold gasoline in Los Angeles, it was the largest gasoline market in the world. And I know that as I look at the prices today, with technology, one, it's not as expensive to extract the oil out of the ground. It's not as expensive to send it through and process it for gasoline, as well as all the other products that are petroleum based. But what I see is massive, massive, massive profits, right? And we see it, but it's never really passed along to the consumer, because we're going to spend, we're going to travel, We're going to do whatever we have to do to enjoy our lives. And at the same time, corporations are making massive profits and not passing it along.
Dr. Jackson, thank you for joining us on the Subscription Impact.
You know, I've enjoyed the conversation. You've made some points that I haven't considered. And that's the great thing about having a conversation, different perspectives. When we speak about DEI, because there's DEI happening right here, right? We got diversity of thought. We got and there's some inclusiveness that's a result of us having the first conversation. And I've shared some points with you. You've shared some points with me. This is how human beings interact, regardless of what the hue of my skin looks like. So I've enjoyed it at the utmost, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Before we wrap, too many people work way too hard and earn too little from their businesses.
Mhm.
You don't have to be one of them. And that's a wrap. Okay, I'm going to end the recording.
Okay, good, because I